is my extreme honor and my privilege to introduce to you someone who is on the front lines, someone who is a dedicated person to our principles, who asks very, very hard questions and insists on truthful answers, who stands up for the truth and the facts as they should be represented, who stands up for the free press, because in a democracy we require a free press, who I call a very dear friend, who stood with me and sat with me and giggled with me and ate with me and guided me, who joined our ranks as a delegate for Bernie with enthusiasm and passion and brought an enormous amount of talent and other things that I'm losing my way on. And I bring you Nomiki Konst, who will speak to us today about a range of smart things, because that is who she is.
All right, I'm bringing all the technology up here. It matters. With my lovely stickers that Josh Fox put all over my computer when we took the train to Orlando for the platform committee meetings on behalf of Bernie Sanders. So, first thing, thank you to NIPAN. Can I tell you how incredible this is? 8 months ago, we were at the convention melting down with being kicked out of our seats, signs being pulled away, and now, look at all those chapters. Democracy's messy, but look at this. This is their second conference with incredible headliners, and I'm very honored to be here, so thank you for that. You've done an incredible job, so let's just give everybody a round of applause. So I'm here to talk to you a little bit about media. Shocker. We're going to have a panel in a couple of minutes to delve in a little bit more. But I want to start by asking you guys about whether you saw Sean Spicer, the press secretary for the president. He called the press the opposition party. And so does Steve Bannon. Both of them did. Well, I'm going to say something. He was right. Let me explain. And I'm very grateful that Arun sort of made a lot of my arguments, so I can cut all of it out. But we come from similar worlds. So corporate media would like you to think that their way of portraying the news has always been the right way. And as Arun said in his presentation, objectivity was actually a marketing ploy developed by the New York Times in 1880. The earliest investigative reporters had beliefs. They were political activists. Ida Tarbow, she was the pioneer in muckraking, investigative reporting, was also known for her political salons where she brought progressives to talk about progressive issues and action items. Lincoln Steffens raced Senator Baker and billed right to work for fair working conditions. Nellie Bly and of course Upton St. Clair. They were all political activists and investigative reporters. The early muckrakers didn't just investigate politicians and establishment institutions. They literally attacked them for being corrupt. And they were unapologetically progressive. I'm getting to it. But as the media corporatized, being a progressive journalist is now looked down on by the establishment. So for those of you who don't know, I used to go on CNN and Fox News every single day, sometimes 6 times a day, just a couple of months ago. I remembered spending hours in front of a monitor in these little rooms that they store you in, commenting on empty podiums and empty tarmacs, waiting for Donald Trump for hours, while Bernie Sanders would literally be in Iowa speaking in front of 20,000 people with no coverage. And that's when I decided that I was going to become a surrogate for Bernie Sanders. There's something wrong with that, because there was a populist presidential candidate, and it wasn't Donald Trump, although he exploited populist terms. But of course the corporate media didn't want to have Bernie Sanders on TV talking about things like campaign finance reform and all the lovely things that Dr. Teachout just went through. They don't want that narrative on there because it affects their donors, it affects their parent companies. I'd also go on panels on Anderson Cooper with 4 clueless Trump supporters, 5 Hillary supporters, with 3 of which did not disclose their financial interests to the campaign and their consulting interests, and me, a volunteer who was not getting paid for any of this. This is what I call the false equivalency. It's when you have a climate denier scientist paid by oil companies up against a scientist debating whether or not global warming exists. That's not a thing. That is something done for ratings, and it actually affects people's understanding of really complicated and very clear issues. It's not fair journalism, it's misleading journalism. Then there are the topics that are not being presented, like anything involving the economy, conflicts of interest, corporatization. We know what this is. But what does that mean today? Why am I okay with the opposition party? Well, because, as Arun says, broadcast is dead. People are unplugging. The average CNN viewer, average, is 64 years old. Fox viewer is 68. I don't know how many 120-year-old men and women are watching these networks, but it seems like they are. 4 months ago, something happened to me. I left mainstream cable news, and I joined this company called the Young Turks. It is the largest online media company, has over 8 billion views, and it is unapologetically progressive. Our lovely founder, they have their main shows. Some of them are not political at all, but they talk about issues and they have commentary. But he decided that he wanted to build a news division. And he went to the audience that is incredibly engaged. I think it's like 4 million subscribers at this point. And he said, let's raise money. Let's do the Bernie Sanders model. Let's try to raise enough money in $500 doses to build a news team. And right now, we are about to hit our $2 million goal. We have an entire news team. I'm so grateful. I was the first investigative reporter on top of Jordan Sheridan, who was there already, to be hired. And my entire salary was crowdsourced. I am beholden to nobody except the tens of thousands of donors and my new editor, who's constantly on me. So I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful to everybody who contributed, who watches. But what does this mean? All of these people who donated to this fund are watching me closely. They watch everything I cover. They retweet my stories. They argue with me. They tip me off on stories. They sometimes do research for me. They back me up when I'm getting pushback from the establishment. An example, I was one of 2 reporters to cover the DNC race for chair regularly, every single event. Dave Weigel from the Washington Post and I were there along the way. I interviewed every single candidate, not just for DNC chair, all the way to treasurer, except for one, Tom Perez. Tom Perez, now chairman Tom Perez. Jake decided to go on the main show, and he asked, why, Secretary Perez, do you not want to meet with one of the 2 reporters on this beat? And I did not take a position. I did not endorse anybody. I was there to investigate. I was really following the money, trying to figure out where all the money the Democratic Party had raised, where it was being spent. Newsflash, it went to consultants. So Tom Perez did not want to do an interview. Jake went on the main show. Within 12 hours, Tom Perez got 12,000 tweets. That it became such bad PR, he had to sit down with me. And then, of course, that video went viral. And it was referenced in Vanity Fair, the New York Times, Washington Post. And when you think about it, you're like, why wasn't the New York Times at every single DNC event? The Democrats are at its lowest point since 1929. And it's the Washington Post and this online news organization that's crowdfunded. So it's not about money, it's about where you're putting that money. Are you spending it on panels with commentators that are not real journalists? Or are you spending it on journalism, which is going out into communities, like Standing Rock, where Jordan Sheridan was one of the few reporters who showed up and covered that from day one, and that was a local issue. Oh, no. But they say local issues don't matter, they don't get ratings. Our ratings were great. This is not what happens, obviously, on CNN and Fox News when I was there. We call this the democratization of media. Our stories are literally weaponized because we have an army of progressives there to share and back them up. But it's not just companies like ours, a 15-year-old company. You guys, you all have cell phones. Most of you are on social media, and if you're not, come to me, and if you need help getting on social media, I will help you. I did a story the other day about the IDC, which, thank you, Zephyr, for bringing it up. The IDC is the Independent Democratic Conference. It is a group of 8 elected Democrats from Democratic districts, there's a sign right there, check that out, who are voting with the GOP, and it has essentially given the Republicans control of the Senate. Well, one of our viewers saw this video that I did, an interview with a senator, a Democratic senator, and he heard something in the video, and he's a teacher. He heard that his state senator, he heard that the IDC was accepting charter school money. So he looked online, all public records, and sure enough, he found he was accepting charter school money, his own state senator. So he decided to go to his town hall, and he took his camera with him, his phone, and he filmed a question. And in the question, he referenced our report. And he said, I learned from the Young Turks about this charter school money flowing in. You campaign as an education reformer. I see you've accepted money from charter schools. And he got him on camera, and the guy didn't have an answer. And then he wrote a blog, and he explained the whole thing, put his video in the blog, and then someone tweeted it to me, and then I retweeted it, and then suddenly it was picked up. And he's had 2 protests in the last week outside of his office, and this is happening everywhere. And now, he's vulnerable for re-election. Yeah. Or take Senator Peralta, a new member of the IDC. I found out he didn't like my story, and he blocked it. Turns out I wasn't the only person he blocked. He blocked a lot of his constituents. Also, turns out there's legal precedent that you're not allowed to do that as a lawmaker. And that became a story. And so now he's unblocking everybody. Shocker. So this is how it works. Go, you guys, constituents, activists, go to your lawmakers, ask tough questions, like where they take money from. If they claim to be progressive, ask them the tough questions. Film it, tweet it out to those politicians. Tag journalists like me, local journalists. Create clever hashtags. You have the ability to use this video like I do. You have the ability to share it on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. It doesn't have to be fancy. I do recommend, I'm going to show you some stuff, that you film the landscape, because you can put that on YouTube. And it's really good if I decide to see it and I want to put it into a video, I can now edit it into a video. You can get one of these things for $30. It's a great little mic if you want to do this all the time. You just upload it to YouTube. Facebook Lives are great, but not as shareable. And tag people. And just keep retweeting it, because this comes up in their search feeds. It's not really technical, it's actually very simple, and if you have any questions afterwards, I'm happy to explain it. But bottom line is, you are the media. We are the media. And yes, politicians should be scared. The goal of journalism is not so it gets lost. It's to have impact. To get people woke and engaged. To hold lawmakers accountable. Yes, we are the opposition party, so I encourage you to own it. And I'm just I found this today, actually. It's an old Thomas Paine quote. A body of men holding themselves accountable to nobody ought not to be trusted by anybody. All right, so this is the panel on the media, and I'm very excited and honored to be moderating the panel. We have Jeff Cohen, who is a media critic and the founding director of the Park Center for Independent Media at Ithaca College. where he's an associate professor of journalism. He wrote the book Cable News Confidential: My Misadventures in Cable Media, or in Corporate Media. Also a former commentator on CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC, and was a senior producer of MSNBC's Phil Donahue primetime show until it was terminated 3 weeks before the Iraq invasion. Cohen founded the media watch group FAIR in 1986 and co-founded the online activist group rootsaction.org in 2011. His columns on media and politics have been published on websites like The Huffington Post, Common Dreams, and Alternet, and dozens of mainstream dailies from USA Today to Washington Post to the Los Angeles Times. And then we have Anne-Marie Adams, who is a public relations consultant for over 2 decades, with public affairs, serving as a lobbyist for science funding at Cornell University. And she teaches public relations, strategic communications, and organizational communications, also at Ithaca College. And her research focuses on the ever-shifting nature of communications in a multi-mobile environment. I figured we'd just do some introductions, right? And then we'll get to the issues. Sound good?
I just want to give a quick overview. I talked to groups of activists. The last time I was in Binghamton was at the Bernie rally. I want to say that meetings like this are just as important as huge rallies like that. So I've got a simple thing to say to you, which is if your first issue is money in politics, or it's climate change, or it's reproductive rights, or it's workers' rights, or it's enhanced Medicare for all, your second issue should be media. Because if we don't crack this problem of media, we're not going to be able to move forward on any of those other issues, as Nomiki, I think, made clear. So there's 3 areas of media activism that people have to always think about. Number 1 is we support independent progressive media. We support it by sharing it. We support it by funding it. You know, the mainstream media was a little clueless about how Bernie Sanders' campaign seemed to come out of nowhere. It didn't come out of nowhere. There were social organizations going on across the country, and there was independent progressive media that the mainstream media had tried to ignore. The Bernie campaign could not have ascended if it wasn't for places like the Young Turks, or Democracy Now!, or Common Dreams, or Alternet, or Truth Out, or Truth Dig. How many of you get some of your news from those places? Yeah, and you can mention 5 others. I know this is the time where the chorus begins. The point is that number 1 aspect of media activism is you support independent media and you spread it to people that don't have the news. You can't argue with a working class Trump supporter every hour of every day, but if you get them hooked on looking once in a while at Alternet, or looking once in a while at Cenk or Nomiki or Jordan at the Young Turks, it's easy in the privacy of your own computer to start paying attention. So that's number 1, promote independent progressive media. Number 2, hound dog the mainstream centrist corporate media and don't ever let up on them. And by corporate centrist media, I of course include National Public Radio. And you might those of you that were fighting the fracking battle had to be a little concerned with all of the fracking ads and the gas ads that run on NPR, although we can't call them ads, they're enhanced underwriting. So if you want to hound dog those mainstream media, confront the New York Times, the Bernie supporters did, and it led to better coverage. Confront the Washington Post, confront NPR. The best way to do that is join FAIR's email list, which you go to fair.org and sign up at the top, and in an organized way, you can confront these middle-of-the-road news outlets. Number 3, and this is something that Zephyr's always talking about, is the structural problem. In media, in mainstream media, we have a monopoly problem. And the number one structural reform issue that everyone's going to be fighting, and I know some of you fought it a couple years ago when Obama had appointed an FCC chair that was in the pocket of the telecommunication industry and the cable news industry. We fought it then and we won. We're going to have to fight it now in about 4 months, because you probably heard that Donald Trump has appointed an FCC chair that's doing his best to end net neutrality. If we end net neutrality, there is no Young Turks. There is no democracy now, alternate. It's the biggest battle in the area of freedom of the press, and it's going on right now to save net neutrality. I have a good feeling that John Oliver will be on our side again, doing another rant. And you might remember his rant melted down the FCC's computers. The organizing that we did then was one of the biggest battles ever waged on a media or communications issue. We're going to have to fight that issue again, and we have to break up the media monopoly. The best way to start the defensive battle we have to fight immediately is save net neutrality.
Tompkins County progressives recently in the last 2 months trying to create some dialogue, because one of the things that we do know is the time is right. It's riper now than it ever has been. And people want to know, what is it should I say? How should I be saying it? And I say there are 5 different generations over the next decade that we need to find a way to take any message and carve it out in as many ways as we can so that everyone understands it. So we've gotten a lot of technology experience today with some of the things, hashtagging us, getting to us. A lot of us have tried getting older individuals into Facebook for the first time. So one of the things that I'm bringing to the table today is to say it is the ripest time for citizens to take their messages to the street, to be heard across multiple venues, whether they're mainstream or not. And if we want to take advantage of that, then let's teach, train, and mobilize people so that they can do that. And I think with the Bernie Sanders campaign, we saw that happen for the first time, across the board, all generations.
Perfect segue. So, what I found interesting about Arun's commentary earlier about broadcast being dead is just how the messaging does shift and how the narratives shift in the post-broadcasting world. But before we get to the post-broadcasting world, and I think this probably is the best question for you, how did a story, walk us through, when MSNBC wants to cover a story, and the newsroom meets that day, how do they work out which stories to cover and which ones not to cover?
I wrote a book about this called Cable News Confidential. The sad reality is what we're all doing in television is looking at the I was a senior producer at Donahue. You're looking at the ratings from the previous day. And those ratings come in 15-minute segments. So you're able to see, gee, when we interviewed this person, the ratings went down. And then when we had this segment about a blonde woman teenager who was abducted from her home. These things, by the way, almost never happen. But when there's so much coverage of it, everyone is afraid, gee, my teenage daughter is going to be kidnapped from her home. If we saw that did well in the ratings, that's what you keep doing. So it's an actual disease. And and people say, what if someone on the left got good ratings? Wouldn't the corporate media promote that person? Well, no, because when we were canceled at the Donahue Show on MSNBC 3 weeks before the invasion of Iraq, we were the most watched program on that channel. So there's limits to ratings, and that's if you're questioning some huge policy of the establishment. Cenk Uygur, by the way, was getting great ratings on MSNBC when they took away his show after 6 months. I think the important thing about mainstream media is to understand that the corporations decide. And if there's one single corporate executive that gave us President Trump on the funding side, it was obviously Robert Mercer, the hedge funder. But on the media side, it was Jeff Zucker. And Jeff Zucker was the guy who was the head of NBC Entertainment that created Apprentice, turned Trump into a star, turned him into a bigger star, and then he moved over to CNN, where Zucker is allegedly doing news. And over at CNN, as Nomiki said, and MSNBC, they were worse than Fox during the primaries because Fox had to give some coverage to all the Republican candidates. But CNN and MSNBC were just trying to pump up the ratings while keeping Bernie off, or in the margin. So what Zucker was doing was every time Trump went to an event or went into his limousine or got out of his limousine, it became breaking news. And so that it's unheard of in a democracy that 20 candidates are running for an office and one candidate gets more minutes of airtime, and I'm not, exaggerating, one candidate got more minutes of airtime than all the others combined. That's not a democracy. And I'll pass out, as long as you bring it back to me at the end of this session, I have a picture that illustrates the point you made, which is on Tuesday night in March of 2016, Bernie Sanders was speaking to thousands of individuals. They were going crazy. There were then only 6 candidates in the race. But CNN and MSNBC kept pointing their camera at an empty podium waiting for Trump while Bernie was speaking. And Bernie did not get on the news that night. But Trump, they were talking about Trump. We think Trump is going to be here. We hear he's almost here. We think he's in the limousine. And I will pass out visual aids so you can see that great moment, because a picture is worth 1,000 words, when they're all waiting for Trump while silencing Bernie Sanders.
I think I was actually on that night. So Anne-Marie, what was the messaging strategy like up until 2016?
I think one of the things we have to understand is that there were topics placed on the table during any election cycle that were either localized or nationalized. And I think when we got into 2016, we looked at broadcast as the only choice. And then when we moved into the opportunities in the other media, other people started hearing messages that had not been heard before, or asking, what does this mean? You can look just recently, this hashtag Justice for Brad's Wife. If you haven't looked up that hashtag, it's very interesting. This one was fired from Cracker Barrel and whatnot. So it's very similar to that. People said, we got to do something about this. What does this mean? What does it mean that Bernie Sanders thinks differently? I'm from the South, so we saw a very different part of the media relayed to us that maybe you did not see in the Northeast. And so unless someone had contact with the northeastern part of the United States, we might not have heard some of the same things. Where this became more evident for me is in the state of Tennessee. There's a county in Carter County that had a very active Bernie Sanders group that actually won their county for Bernie in a state that's predominantly Republican. And they saw that as a small victory for future victories. And so I think coming into 2016, efforts like this small Bernie Sanders effort in Carter County, Tennessee, which is Elizabethton area, they might not have happened before because they weren't able to get their messages out. They weren't able to tie messages in the mainstream media to what they were doing. And I think that's the change, is that some messages now are placed in other venues other than the mainstream media and are heard in resounding success.
And it seems, just based on our metrics from the Young Turks and some of the stuff that I share, it's almost hyper-targeted. So it's not just that you might not be reaching 3 million people a night, but you're reaching, in our case, hundreds of thousands of people that are so engaged and so willing to take part and take it, that next step over, learn more.
Yeah, I think it's the quality of wanting to hear what you have to say. And so whether it's large numbers or 200 people, those 200 people will take that message and expand it farther than if it had been 200,000. They're looking for those messages, and so better to have the quality than quantity.
So you talk about local, and I think both of you can discuss this. The argument, as I stated before, has been by these major news organizations and even some of the new media companies. I'm part of these media circles, and we have these conversations all the time. You know, Vox, which is very well funded. There's some NBC contributions there. You know, Huffington Post. The newsrooms, if somebody pitches a local story somewhere, the newsrooms will always usually say, nobody cares about that local interest story. And what I love about my job is I pitch a local story and Jenk says, yeah, that's great. People want to see that because they can connect with that in their communities. And Standing Rock was a very unique local story, but it obviously engaged tens of thousands of people right there on the spot. So how do you make a case for local news to these large companies that, you know, the ratings actually might be there? And what is the struggle there?
I mean, I definitely think Main Street now realizes that local is far more national than it ever has been before. So we have that going for us in that they will pick up some items that they might not have picked up before. I always talk to individuals about, well, what is your hook? Tell me what the hook is. Tell me why I care about that. And sometimes telling that hook is hard for people. And I usually take 3 questions to say, what is it that matters now and in the future? And then what matters today? And then tell me who wants to spread this message further tomorrow. And I think that's the difference, is that we have the opportunity if you understand what your hook is. And I think the Bernie Sanders campaign had a hook that not only people on the Democratic side of the House believed in and took seriously, we had people on the other side and people who were not committed anywhere.
Yeah, I think that the way to pitch local stories is that they have national implications, and that every local story can lead to a spark, can lead to a wildfire. There are already a couple cities, I want to point out, that have already passed resolutions instructing their members of Congress to begin investigation toward articles of impeachment against Trump. And we have, I'm part of, and so we're trying to build that city by city. There are cities now passing resolutions against Trump's military buildup while cutting all domestic programs. And that just passed in Charlottesville, Virginia last week. So the key is to convey that these local stories have the ability to become national overnight. I co-founded RootsAction.org, an online group. How many people get the emails from Roots Action? If you don't, you should sign up. Along with our partners at Free Speech for People, on day 1, we started the website impeachdonaldtrumpnow.org. And within a matter of weeks, we had 800,000 signatures. And RootsAction.org has been going for about 5 years. It's by far the fastest petition we've ever had. But all of these national issues, especially for activism and for local media activists and local journalists, is find the local angle on the national story. And if activists can say we're the first in the state of New York that's passed this resolution, or we're the first big city, and that's how you get the local media to cover something, or the national media to cover your local issue.
For those in the audience who might have a video that's breaking, maybe it's an interview, they go to an event. Again, Arun talked about this. He said that these videos don't have to be as short as everybody believes. I know with my work, some of my longer interviews, I'm shocked by people sitting through them, and I usually cut them down into shorter segments that are more shareable. You guys might be familiar. How many of you are familiar with Now This? Now This. Okay, so for those of you who aren't, it's a new media company funded by some of the funders of Huffington Post, and they create these like little explainer videos that are short and have lots of text. I actually like them a lot. I just don't understand why the longer form is more impactful. So maybe you guys can explain, like, what's the sweet spot if somebody wants to post a video that catches on?
I would say do it in many different lengths. You can't go wrong by having a short version, a middle version, and the full version. I think that's the way people should look at, especially electronic media. If I had some great video I would send it to Young Turks, or I would send it to you to get on Young Turks. You got some good video about activism and the mainstream media won't cover it, send it to Democracy Now! They'll cover it. So the key is, I think, to make things in different sizes, but make sure you're feeding independent, progressive media instead of always beating your head against the wall when you get censored at big mainstream media.
Right, and a lot of times too, media will say, do you have a 30-second video of this same clip that you just sent me? We noticed, I think when we had our protest on our own campus by our students, that a lot of the students were filming, and major mainstream media as well as other media were contacting the students directly, do you have more? So I think that's the misnomer that has to be short. Yeah, have short, but have your longer extended pieces also available.
What did broadcast news get right? I mean, like cable news, CNN, MSNBC, Fox even.
Their audience, I guess they thought they were appealing to, if you want to say got it right. What I find with anyone who is a next gen, and that includes anyone who is millennial or below, they weren't there, so they got that wrong. Did they get the audiences that were already paid into them? And I think that's it.
Quick follow-up to that. For those of you who aren't aware, that there's an unplug rate, right? So most millennials they don't have cable news, it's expensive. Maybe the issues aren't really speaking to them the same way. I once asked an executive at a media company in the heat of the primary why they wouldn't invest in Bernie Sanders, because it spoke to an audience that they were losing. Like, he was the king of the millennials. And they said, everything's short term in the news industry. We'll deal with that in 5 years.
You got an excuse for why political censorship was going on. I mean, Nomiki mentioned that the median age of a Fox News viewer is almost 70. The median age of a Bill O'Reilly viewer is 72. So if we're in this horrible era of Trump, we're looking around for something that gives us cause for optimism. The cause for optimism is in every single poll, on virtually every single issue. The most progressive age demographic are people under 35. And it's no accident that they have unplugged from mainstream corporate media. So I think that's important for us to understand. When I was at MSNBC, all they ever talked about was the demo. The demo is the demographic. It means all that advertisers care about is people 25 to 54. And yet here you had one candidate who was an outsider emerging on the right, that was Trump, during this endless year and a half of an election. You had another candidate emerging out of nowhere on the left, Bernie Sanders. One was appealing to their demo, and the other one got all of the coverage. At that point, I think you have to, chalk it up to political bias. I'll tell you just a quick family anecdote. Last Thanksgiving 2015, I visited my mom. She's going to turn 95. I visited her in Michigan, and I said, Mom, what do you think of Bernie Sanders? And she said, who's he? Mom, this is November 2015. And we're already getting this huge, the biggest rallies. I said, Mom, he's running for president. No, he's not. Mom, do you know Donald Trump's running for president? Well, of course, everybody knows that. And the interesting thing, remember, this is Thanksgiving 2015. Right after I had that conversation, the very respected researcher named Tyndall, who just counts the minutes of the nightly network news. He counted how many minutes all of the presidential candidates were getting in the first 11 months of 2015. In other words, through the whole primary season. And I know that my mom prides herself, even at her advanced age, that she keeps up with current events. And the way she keeps up with current events is to watch ABC World News Tonight every night. She likes the young anchor, David Muir, who incidentally is an Ithaca College graduate. She thinks he's young and handsome and smart, and she watches it every night. Well, so right after I had this conversation with my mom, Tyndall releases the figures. And how many minutes, on the news show, my mom watches every night. Bernie Sanders, well, start with Trump. Trump got 81 minutes of coverage on ABC World News Tonight in the first 11 months of 2015. Bernie Sanders got 20 seconds, 1/3 of 1 minute. So I don't blame my mom because maybe she was in the bathroom during the 20 seconds. But I do blame the corporate mainstream media, and as you pointed us there, they're obsessed with viewers under 54. But they had a candidate who was, really charging up the viewers that they're most interested in, which is those under 35, and they still wouldn't cover him. I think it had something to do with his message. Trump was pointing the finger. You know who's ruining this country? It's this group, and it's that group, and it's this other group, none of whom have any power. And Bernie Sanders is saying, you know who's ruining the country? It's that group, and it's that group, and they own the media, and they control health insurance. So, it had something to do with the two different messages. Of course, Trump was good for ratings. Bernie would have been good for ratings, but they didn't give him the coverage.
Actually, it's interesting you say that. So after being very frustrated at CNN for several months, I decided to go through some of the ratings and see, I wonder how my panels are doing, where I'm talking about Bernie a lot, or debating a Hillary Clinton supporter. The person I was debating who's on most, and she's a walking conflict of interest, and that's my beat, so I'll say it. Her name's Maria Cardona. She never discloses her conflicts of interest, the hundreds of thousands of dollars she's getting on the campaign, the fact that she was lobbying for places like Exxon and Saudi Arabia, the list goes on and on. She would never disclose it, and she was a DNC member. Never disclosed that. I looked at her ratings, and she had the lowest ratings out of all of the contributors, and she's a paid CNN contributor. And I'm going, this just doesn't make sense. How is this person a paid contributor and on from 5 a.m. to 10 o'clock at night, 11 o'clock at night, several times a day? And there's a few of these people. And our Bernie segments were great. I also think people were craving it, but no.
Okay. If you're interested in the connections of the pundits that appear day after day and who they're taking money from, the greatest reporter on this is at The Intercept. I encourage, if you're not looking at The Intercept about money and politics and this wonderful young reporter named Lee Fung, then you're missing out. Because he pointed out how many of these Democratic Hillary supporters, but they'd be brought on as just Democratic strategists, they were actually corporate lobbyists. But that's never discussed. So the one thing, when you're hound dogging the media, which is one of those 3 areas of media activism, and you do that best if you go at the top of fair.org's homepage and give them your email, and then you'll be able to mobilize with tens of thousands of people mobilizing along with you. One of the things you have to understand, and I would argue that NPR and PBS are among the worst, is whenever you hear a pundit or an expert introduced as former, it's their way of censoring the news. When they say, we're bringing on a former Congress member, former Congress member such and such, and that's the extent of the whole introduction, or a former Assistant Secretary of Defense, or a former Assistant Secretary of State, they're lying to you. Because they know every one of these formers are currently including Cardona, very active in Washington as consultants or lobbyists for corporate interests, which just happen to also be usually the big sponsors of the news. But when you hear it on NPR and PBS, I'm hoping you'll go forward and complain to NPR and PBS NewsHour if you still listen or watch. But a classic NPR segment was during the first debate around healthcare reform during the Clinton era. They used to always bring on a former Democratic Congress member, Downey from Long Island, a former Republican Congress member, Vin Weber of Minnesota, and they would debate, and the beginning of the debate would be, well, of course single payer doesn't make sense. Of course single payer is a non-starter. Of course Medicare for, that's the begin, and then they would go and do a narrow debate. Well, we learned later that both of these formers, the former Democratic Congress member, the former Republican Congress member, were both paid consultants from corporate healthcare interests. And they're debating healthcare week after week. This is happening all of the time. And so when you hear someone introduced as a former or a Democratic strategist and they don't do better than that, they are being nice to those pundits so they will keep coming on the air, but it's censorship.
And so that they also, Lee Fong did this article in The Intercept, and it's also about giving access to these channels so they have access to a candidate like Secretary Clinton. Final question, because we're wrapping up. The media missed it, like big time. They like totally missed that Donald Trump was going to crush Hillary Clinton. Well, on the map of states, which matters, because we didn't change our constitution 2 years ago, this is how we run presidential races. Also, with low turnout for those making under, $100,000 a year, lowest turnout in the last 3 decades. With all the data and all the science and all the reporting and all the experts and all these panels, how did they miss what was happening? I mean, what message was not being debated on CNN, on Anderson Cooper every night?
You can even read some of J.D. Vance's remarks about where parts of our country were looking for something, and they felt Trump answered that question for them. And therefore, someone was listening, but not mainstream America. I can say from Tennessee to South Carolina, there was no doubt in both states that Trump was going to win. No doubt. From the citizenry. They are predominantly Republican. So someone wasn't listening to what the people at the grassroots level were saying.
Well, mainstream media is not exactly well connected to working class people. And so if you're disconnected from working class people, you think the system is working. If you're a multi-million-dollar consultant to Hillary Clinton and Trump is saying, make America great again, and you come up with this genius slogan, America is already great, you are someone who is out of touch with working class people. And so the media are as out of touch with working class people as were Hillary's consultants and the people that run the Democratic Party, the elite in the Democratic Party. So, I mean, I think that's the main issue is class. That, when's the last time you saw a union leader on national TV? The main issue, I think, is class. And another issue, and I'm going to do a little plug since we're winding down, for any of you that are near Ithaca, every year we give out an award for outstanding achievement in independent media, and that's named after I.F. Stone, Izzy Stone, one of the greatest dissident journalists that ever lived. And our event is April 12th, and we're bringing 3 journalists and 2 filmmakers to Ithaca, and you're going to want to meet them. And one is partly an issue they missed, which was voter suppression. That if you cover voter suppression the way Democracy Now! Covered voter suppression, the way the nation covered voter suppression, all of a sudden this election and this democracy doesn't seem as fair as the mainstream media wants us to think it is. So we have one of the heroes who broke story after story about voter suppression will be in Ithaca on the evening of April 12th, and his name is Ari Berman from The Nation. And then we're also bringing 2 reporters who broke the story of abuses and avoidable deaths at private for-profit prisons, including Shane Bauer of Mother Jones, who wrote the article, My 4 Months as a Private Prison Guard. He will tell you everything about his experience earning about $8 an hour minimum wage, working after I think 2-3 months of training, working in a private prison. And then Seth Wessler showed for The Nation all of these immigrants in for-profit, private U.S. prisons that were dying needless deaths because they weren't given medical care. We're also bringing filmmakers that made the great docuseries America Divided, which is showing now in community groups across the country. The Izzy Award, April 12th, Ithaca College, which is where we're from.
Right. And Nomiki, we need to say, people like you, young, vibrant, passionate, we need to continue to support you. And that's, if you're an influencer, we should be influencing for you. So I do want to applaud you because you stood out during the Bernie Sanders campaign and you continue to stand out on behalf of the next generation. So, that's